The next talk is experimental evidence of a diurnal character of horizontal drift velocities at F region heights by Kirchhoff and Carpenter, and the talk will be given by Kirchhoff.
This work is essentially concerned with measurements of drift velocities, or also called plasma transport velocities at F region heights, which we define for this purpose at about 300 kilometers. The technique used to measure these velocities is the incoherent scattering technique, and the place is Millstone Hill. Now, when we began these measurements, what was known about drift velocities at those heights essentially were the theoretical works of Maeda and Matsushita. And we also had a paper published in 1972 by Dr. Evans, on which he had made a number of horizontal electric field measurements, which are closely horizontal because of the inclination of the magnetic field, which is 70 degrees. And these results have given some interesting results with regard to the origin of the electric field, but they were only made during the daytime, and so we were very eager to somehow achieve measurements at night also, and in this way define in some way a model of experimental drift velocities at F region heights, and then try to compare them with theoretical calculations. In the first slide we have a typical variation of one August day last year in the north-south direction. This measurement is made at 18 degrees elevation angle in order to keep it perpendicular to the magnetic field. And some of the features are almost the same as previously reported values from Evans or other authors, for example at Arecibo and so on. But the nighttime values are quite different, as you can see. First of all, the magnitudes are much higher, and we have two peaks here at close around sunset and sunrise. The crossover points are more or less between 8 and 10 o'clock in the morning, 18 and 20 o'clock in the afternoon. In the east-west direction, now resolved in the horizontal direction, is the drift velocity again as a function of local time. And again, we see a much higher amplitude during the nighttime than during the daytime. Now, the day-to-day variability of these amplitudes and the crossover points are very big indeed, and also during the nighttime we have uncertainties or error bars of the order of 30 to 40 meters. So that's quite high when compared to the daytime, when we have about 15 meters per second uncertainty. That's one reason why we have tied these measurements together with previously available measurements in order to define the best way we could a model, which is shown now in the next slide as a continuous line. So this is an average velocity variation pattern which used about 12 days of measurements. And the other curves are theoretical calculations. Matsushita 1971 is a dashed line. This one here. Maeda is a dotted line, and there's another model, Staney, which is a red line, dashed line. Now, the main difference here between the theoretical models, Matsushita and Maeda, is that Matsushita in 1971 gave the idea that perhaps the electric field measured in the F region is not only an electric field propagated up the field lines by the region dynamo, But it could also be very well downward conduction along field lines from the plasmasphere or magnetosphere. And so this variation is actually the total electric field which is observed at the E region, or in other words, it's an electric field responsible for driving the SQ current system, which then, if it's supposed to arise in the plasmasphere, has to propagate all the way down from above. And we also can see that the comparison is much better with this kind of model than with, for example, Maeda's model, which is a dashed one. The same thing we can see in the east-west component. Again, this is Matsushida's model, and this is the experimental model, with the exception of this region here, which is exactly at the nighttime hours, let's say. And however, the phase seems to be quite well in comparison, and the model is actually an average model, as I said, and we made a Fourier analysis of this in order to see what are the relative sizes or magnitudes of the different frequency terms. And it turns out that the diurnal term is about twice as large in the north-south component and 3 times as large as a semi-diurnal component in the east-west component. So the fact that our experimental model compares best with this Matsushida model, 1971, means that actually the electric field, at least at night for sure, is originated in the plasmasphere by plasmaspheric motions. Another feature which links to the same conclusion is that the east-west amplitudes are much higher than the north-south ones. Here we have about 50 meters per second here and 40 meters per second, whereas in the north-south direction we have about 30 meters and again 30 or 40 meters as a maximum amplitude. Again, in the east-west direction, this here might be due, there is a slight possibility that it's some kind of bias in the measurements, but as it is now, this peaks means that during the nighttime, the horizontal total vector, or the component of east-west and north-south velocity, rotates counterclockwise, which is another indication that the electric field is propagated down from the plasmasphere or from the magnetosphere. This slide shows the effect of an electric field, constant electric field, in the magnetospheric tail region as deduced by Mendelo, in which he supposed a constant electric field in time and space and simply mapped down to the F region height. This factor m is the amplitude of this electric field, magnetospheric origin electric field, and we can see that this is the superposition of the model, of the experimental model, and the electric field of magnetospheric origin. In the case of m very slow, it's the proper model, and as the index increases, we have a quite different shape during the whole period of 24 hours. And the interesting thing is that even during magnetic active conditions, which is something like in this region here, 0.8 to 1 millivolt per meter, we have one measurement made on a previous occasion in February 1973, when the magnetic activity was quite high, and that's the dashed line shown here. So, since the model was formed for quiet conditions, it's also it at least shows that the variation is the same when the magnetic activity goes higher and higher. And next slide shows the composition of the total velocity perpendicular to the magnetic field, and shows quite well that in the night, let's say from 24 to 8 hours in the morning, the rotation is counterclockwise and then begins to rotate clockwise again. So in conclusion, since the previous work by Dr. Evans showed undoubtedly that during the daytime the electric field should come from the E region, we conclude that at night at least the origin must be in the plasma sphere, and that the whole effect on the measurement is much more according to the plasma sphere because amplitudes are much higher. And I read then the total conclusions in steps. The diurnal frequency component of drift velocity pattern is dominant, being larger than the semi-diurnal by a factor of 3 for the north-south component and a factor of 2 for the east-west component. The horizontal velocity vector rotates clockwise during the day and counterclockwise at night, with a magnitude 4 times larger at night. Amplitudes of east-west velocities are larger than north-south ones. Model 1 is in better agreement with Matsushida's theoretical model for the total electric field than other dynamo theories, thus indicating that F-region electric fields, as measured at Millstone Hill, originate predominantly from the plasma sphere.
If you included the original data that I published, there's a slight danger in the sense that it could be that Millstone is sometimes well inside the plasma pores and seeing a dynamo drift, and at other times is in the trough is seeing magnetospheric electric fields. And you will not have altered my original conclusion if you use a lot of my original data together with some of your data where perhaps we were in the trough. So I think we have to be careful in this interpretation. It may be right, but it could be that there are two totally different situations and some prevail at different times.